I'm intrigued by our host for this session, CRISP, because it delivers early warning risk intelligence, which just feels like something that we could all have used a little more of 9 months ago. And I'm intrigued by the speaker, Rishad Tabakawala, who is not only a senior advisor to Publicis Group, but the author of a book called Restoring the Soul of the Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. And once again, staying human seems to me to be something that both companies and all of us could use some advice on going forward. I am going to hand over to Adam Hildreth, who is the CEO and founder of CRISP. Adam, take it away.
Thanks very much for that. So we're gonna, I think I'm gonna also very, very quickly hand back to Richard to introduce himself, and then I'll do an introduction because he is by far the more senior figure than myself. So Richard, you can take it away.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you everybody who's listening in. I'm Rishad Tabakawala. I am an author of a book called Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in an Age of Data. I'm also an advisor, and prior to this new life, I was the chief strategist and chief growth officer of the Publicis Group, where I spent 37 years of my career. And I would like Adam to introduce himself. I'm also an advisor to Adam's company, which is CRISP. And then we'll start speaking a little bit about our topic, which is the risk in doing the right thing. But Adam, a little bit about yourself, and then off we go.
Sure. So I guess about the risk in doing the right thing, talking about a bit of background. So my life began in creating what we'd now refer to as one of the first social media platforms. Before Mr. Zuckerberg got the term and made it global. But we had one of the first virtual worlds and social media platforms in the UK, a company called Dubbit. And that really made a spark in terms of how user-generated content and people can essentially, what we referred to originally back in 2000 as Web 2.0, how people became the content. And alongside people creating the content for good, we also found that people were creating content for the bad. And that's when in 2005, we founded CRISP, really to work on solutions that would help brands, enterprises, and social media platforms themselves understand how you differentiate between the good and bad, and how you work out the things you need to deal with and the things that you don't need to deal with. So we've been involved in this for a long time, 2005, so 15 years. And that's what our life is based around, I guess. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what are the real issues? How do you identify the issues? And how does a corporation, an enterprise, a brand work out what are the things they need to care about and what are the things they don't care about? And that's what we do at CRISP.
Perfect, absolutely. So to set the stage and context, we already know we were living in a highly transformative world because of the forces of globalization, demographic shifts, and technological change. And then we had the mother of all crises, which is with COVID-19, which is a combination of a social crisis, a financial crisis, a health crisis, and a political crisis, pretty much in every single country of the world, regardless of whether you were rich or poor, though it was affecting the poor more. At the very same time, we have movements. We have the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement, the Brexit movement. In every particular country, we have some movement or the other. And layered on that is a form of media, which is social media, which is basically available to everybody and can both do an incredible amount of good and can be weaponized for an incredible amount of bad. All of this taking place while companies are beginning to realize that purpose and doing the right thing is not only critical for market capitalization, but also to attract and retain the world's best talent. So you have all of this going on at the very same time. And then you have big practitioners of influence marketing, which are a lot of the people who are attending this particular conference. And often we were told to make sure that we don't take a stand, we don't take a stance, and we don't piss off people. But in today's world, if you want to have purpose and you want to have principles, you have to take a stand and you have to take a stance, and you are going to piss off people. So to a great extent, there is a risk in doing the right thing, because in addition to whatever backlash one may get, one also gets the backlash today at scale in this highly global medium, which is probably the medium for influencers, which is affecting everything from the United States election to pretty much everything. And to a great extent, as these things scale, it doesn't in many matter whether it's truth or not truth. As long as it reaches a lot of people and it scales and you don't do anything about it, mistruth becomes truth and the world goes on. So in many ways, you were prescient, Adam, when you started this company, because in effect, if you don't know what's going to hit you, it's going to hit you.
Absolutely, and that's the real challenge, right? In this world of where people talk about big data, but I talk about probably big conversations. The amount of conversational data that happens across social media platforms is huge. It's absolutely massive. The number of tiny little things that you might need to care about as an organization is also huge, but how do you know what matters? And how do you know, going back to your point, what is the thing that is going to spread? And what is the thing that everyone's going to start talking about? What is it that matters, and how do you get to the bottom of that? And that's the challenge that everyone has, is you've got such a big amount of data, such a big amount of conversational data. How do you find the things that are going to actually pose a risk, a threat, an opportunity to an organization? And how do you know what's going to happen before it's actually happened? And that's where most organizations today are struggling, from my perspective.
Absolutely. In fact, what I have seen over the last decade or so is what turned out initially to be something where you shared what you ate and where you were, whether it was a Twitter or a Facebook or whatever around the world, has then become first a very interesting marketing medium, then an amazing political marketing medium, then an amazing way to control people's opinions or influence people's opinions. And then it became a business issue. It was far greater than marketing. Your stock price could rise or fall. It could impact your supply chain. Somebody could go into your restaurant and it could be something to do with service. In effect, what we now have is a medium that allows any individual with the right enragement and with the right algorithms to scale to billions of people. And that is really the challenge. No longer does someone who basically spits on a pizza stay in that restaurant, it goes global.
You're spot on. And I guess the bit that we found over the last 15 years is it's not the content that matters. It's the person that produces the content, who they influence, the reason why they're creating the content. Are they what we refer to as an instigator? Are they going to just create tons of this content and hope something finally sticks? Or are they just a customer that's complaining but happen to influence a particular group of people who can influence other people? So I guess the big area that we're seeing in growth is, how can you understand a particular narrative, understand who's creating it, but who are they influencing, and whether that narrative is going to stick and be shared? And that's the $1 million question, right? Which is, what do we care about? What don't we care about? How do we know what we want to produce a counter narrative for or not? And the dots. And the way we explain it is, you've got to understand the person behind the content to understand whether it's worth looking at or not from a company perspective. And that's exactly where what we see, which is what stuff goes global and what stuff doesn't. And that's ultimately what brands need to care about, right?
Absolutely. And that is a big understanding and finding that this is truly a global medium. So for instance, while there is a lot of noise about what Facebook should or should not do with the United States Congress, we should remember that only 5% of Facebook's users are American citizens. 95% are outside. And to a great extent, it is impossible, though we're trying to build walls and borders, that in this world of influence, that you think that your border stops where your country border or your local border or your category border stops. It pretty much comes from anywhere, which is a big thing. And so the entire idea is, how do we identify risk? And how do we identify risk that's real risk versus getting up every 5 minutes in the night with a phone call saying there's something risky? And so how do you all, or how does one separate a signal from the noise?
So it's really, when we talk about signal from the noise, we can take it one step further, which is the whole issue of culture. And even if you understand, so when we look at the globe, we tend to look at language, but actually the real big separator is culture, and what affects different audiences and different consumers and different users, different customers, however we want to refer to the people we want to speak to, is really the culture that they're involved in. And I'm, as you of course can tell by my accent, I'm British, so we have a very weird sense of humor that none of the rest of the world seems to get, but we love it. So something that occurs in the UK is going to have a very different effect than something that occurs in North America, South America, or the rest of the world, even though we could all be speaking the same language. So understanding culture, but understanding the signals that influence the individuals, and understanding what does spread and how you can, take a piece of content and work out what language it's in, but who's saying it and what was the impact when this person talks, who do they influence, who follows them, what are those types of people, really expanding. Imagine a graph, right? And that talks about a graph of influence. There's always going to be that initial instigator, that initial spark, that then, and those happen all the time, every day, because there's always going to be people you started off by talking about. There's always going to be the brand detractors or the brand haters. They're always going to go. It's working out which bit of their narrative is working with their audience, and you've got to understand language, you've got to understand culture, you've got to understand how those things are affected. So it's really about combining, coming back to the question, combining all of those signals together based on past events that we've seen, that we know that these signals mean that this thing is rising and we need to look at it and we need to do something about it. But what you can't do is, you definitely can't do that at scale without some serious tech, because there are so many of those little sparks and that just happen. And I think that's where we're moving to at the moment.
Well, my sense is, as you know, as someone who has been a big supporter of my book, I believe that successful companies combine the story and the spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet is really the technology, which is absolutely necessary. And the story is obviously the people, the understanding of the culture, understanding of the principles, etc. And today, to do the right thing, you both need the mind and you need the heart. The mind is really the technology that lets you know what's going on. And the heart is the gumption to make tough decisions, like Mars recently made on Uncle Ben's or other things. Because to a great extent, the technology cannot basically make the principal decisions. The technology can help you learn, monitor, and manage the decisions, but it's really people, and people that are in our audience and who they consult with or themselves have to make those decisions. But you need the technology early to figure out both what the issue is and then to monitor it, which I think is a big thing. And I think the big difference is you want to learn when the spark turns into a flame rather than when the flame turns into a fire. How do you all do that? Which is because a lot of people can tell you when the place is burning. That's really what social media monitoring is. But how do you know when you can put out the fire before the whole place is on fire?
And you spot on, and that is really where I guess the industry is going right now, which is, don't tell me that the house is burning down or is burned down. Tell me that you think it's very likely that it's going to. So I've got that time and that opportunity. And even the opportunity, by the way, there's a lot of, if we look at social justice movements, there is time for brands to use that as an opportunity, as a positive, not as a negative, right? Sometimes it's going to be, it's not relevant for you to get involved in this conversation. Other times it's going to be, as you just mentioned with Mars, very relevant to get involved and do something proactively and think about it. But where this really occurs is understanding the extra signals. So not just looking, because if you think about it, there is, and coming back to the same concept, there's always the brand detractors, right? There's always going to be. So just because you see a trend in content, who is that trend? Where is that trend originating from? Where's it being instigated by? Who are the flames being fanned by, in a sense? Because that might mean, because it's a certain audience, that they're never going to particularly like your brand. They're a competitor brand, so you don't need to worry about it, versus actually this is all of our customers, and our customers are really having a backlash, or the audience that we want to attract are having a backlash. So that's when we talk about looking at this this graph. So taking just away from just the content, who created it, who do they influence, what are they talking about, what else are they talking about, what are their interests, what are their groups, and using those signals based on past events to be able to predict future events. And I think that's the real opportunity, because that gives you the window of time. When we're talking about prediction, not facts, it hasn't happened yet, but we really think it's going to.
Yes, and that time, stitch in time can save nine, as you British people say, which I learned in India. But to a great extent, the folks in our audience and the entire world of PR and influence marketing is increasingly important, because in a world of social and other media at scale, there is an amazing impact that this has on every part of the organization. And in many ways, I say there is a new ESG. So instead of just being environment and social and government or governance, it's now employee, society, and government. And how do you, in fact, a lot of the reason many of the companies boycotted Black Lives Matter, I figured out, was, in addition to doing the right thing, a lot of employees in the company went to management and said, we need to take a stand. So to a great extent, understanding employees, understanding society at large, and understanding government, and how all of those both give you opportunity and risk to your business, is a major form of next generation intelligence, I guess, right?
Yeah, and all of it is about getting ahead of the game, right? It's not about being told that something's happened or is happening. It's about saying that this is going to happen. And
that's because of the exponential amplification that can happen if you don't know early enough.
And the amplification part is, you've got to almost predict the narratives and the issues and the problems that are going to be amplified. So that's about getting ahead of the game, because once it's been amplified, we talk about that. There's some great stats out there that we're more likely to consume fake news than real news because it's more interesting, right? But if you can get ahead of the game, and if a brand, and we've seen in recent times, we don't need to go into examples of brands being utilized in fake news that is so out of the, from a different planet of how big the issue was, but people were believing it. Because we've got networks out there now that are amplifying this content at massive scale, but no one's realizing it until it's too late. And it makes essentially mainstream news that in our world is old school, which is the headlines of a major national. It's already been amplified on social. And being able to understand what that narrative is, who's spreading it, and whether they've got capability to amplify it is critical to any organization to get ahead of it. Because once it's already gone viral, it's very hard to come back from that. Very, very hard.
Absolutely. So I know we've got about another 10 minutes. I want to see if we have any Q&A, but I'll quickly sort of summarize, some key sort of thoughts, which is without a doubt, we're living today in a world where influence marketing is the biggest form, or influence is probably the biggest form of what is impacting society and business and industry, without a doubt, because of social media, global, and a bunch of stuff. For companies to potentially both take advantage or make sure that there are minimal risks, the faster they know, the better they know, is good. And in order to do that, it's a combination of amazing technology and people, which is sort of the story and the spreadsheet. The idea really is, if you're not intelligent about the risk around you, the risk might take you over. I don't know if we have time for or whether there is a way to do Q&A. Otherwise, we could keep chatting. But I just wanted to make sure that if there was Q&A, we could get those in the next 10 minutes.
And I think probably, Michelle, before we wait for the Q&A, I think where the world is changing today, and just circling back to how you started, which is that I think a lot of people, if we look at fake news that we just talked about, I think for a long time, people thought that fake news was almost a political issue. And it was to some extent, because that, all of us are affected by political issues and fake news that are there. But there is a very interesting thing starting to happen, which is generally in PR, influence, brand, that fake news is being used as a weapon. And it's incredibly easy because people want to believe. And what I mean by that is it's the point I made a few minutes ago. People want to believe the crazy narrative rather than the easy narrative that, of course, is true most of the time. They want to believe the crazy. And there are people out there now for lots of it. And if you couple fake news with social justice movements that are going on, the social justice movements means people are acting a bit crazy themselves, blaming brands, organizations, social platforms for being behind this, which is meaning that it's leading them to, what would be called normal individuals to create this, and it's been amplified at scale. So that's probably one of the messages is we're seeing more and more. I think a couple of years ago, fake news you just couple with politics and elections. I think now you're seeing mainstream brands, companies, executives being brought into that same thing for a lot of reasons that probably didn't exist a few years ago.
Absolutely. We have a question which you would be great at answering, which is, please be specific about what technology can do and how much is still about good old-fashioned wisdom and judgment.
Well, actually, that is a great question. So technology can't do anything without wisdom and judgment, is the easy way to say that. So at CRISP, our view is, and we've spent 15 years trying to get to understand and get to the bottom of it, is that we need technology to join the dots between a piece of content, who created it, who that person is, who they influence, and give technology the understanding. So just like as human beings, we go through school and we learn, that's exactly what technology needs to do. Technology will never teach humans. Humans have to teach technology. And that's where so if we can teach it about past events, it can then connect the dots.
Perfect. And then it can basically provide us with the insights or information, and then we add the insights and human judgment to it.
Correct. And it will get it wrong. That's the other thing. Technology can do the heavy lifting, but it's not going to be precise. right? It's going to give you a little, you know, it can take 1 billion pieces of content like the likes we do at Crisp on a weekly basis, and it can digest it down into a few things that it thinks are important, but those few things need to turn into one thing or nothing at all, and that needs human input. And the more human input goes back into technology, then it becomes actually 1 billion items into 10 things is now 1 billion items into 5 things. So now a human has to look at 5 to create the one, and it gets better over time, but new things are going to happen. And that's where you need that human loop.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that people forget is while, you know, Big Blue from IBM or Deep Blue from IBM beat the best chess player, the best chess player plus Deep Blue beat Deep Blue. So it's really a question of technology plus people always beats technology alone, which is a key thing. There's another question, but this question, I don't know if there's a question that'll come on topic. This is an off-topic question, which I'll take 1 minute to quickly answer, because it's not necessarily about this topic, but apparently I'm supposed to have an answer for this, which is, how do you see the future of the big advertising holding companies? I think that the future of the big advertising holding companies is bright after a period of a little bit of gloom. And that is primarily if they become marketing holding groups versus advertising holding groups. Because in the Western world, advertising is defined as communication that you interrupt with messages is in secular decline. But if you consider it about how to work and help clients work with highly empowered people with almost godlike power, it is in, I would say, in a renaissance. And as I explained to people, the entire communications industry is 650 billion. If you include the area of technology services that have to do with marketing, strategic services with marketing, commerce, it's a $1.6 trillion category. So what we're basically seeing is an entire group of people moving from the period of being a caterpillar to a butterfly. And that in-between period is extremely ugly to look at, which is what we're going through. But I am looking for the butterfly. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to ask you another question, which is, how do you all combine technology and people? Because you do have people and you do have technology. And how do you all do that?
So I guess as I just talked about, you have to start with humans, and you have to start with what we refer to as intelligence experts, so intelligence analysts who understand how problems occur, what the links between disparate data sets are, and they train very, very clever AI. But the AI there is to do the heavy lifting, the heavy working, but to give the ultimate decision to a person. We're not going to call someone at 3 a.m. if it isn't a fire. And that's the critical bit. Or if we're not predicting a fire, we can't get that wrong, because it's the boy who cries wolf. And that's where AI and human intelligence coupled together, it stops the boy who cries wolf. It means that once a month, that once a year, when you get that call, you get out of bed because you know you've now got 10 hours a month or 10 minutes to be able to relax, react, and have that time to think, to either use the opportunity or stop the incident from happening.
Fantastic. So I'm going to quickly summarize, since I think we're out of time, and then you can add any additional thoughts. Clearly, influential marketing or influencer marketing is probably the most important part of marketing, but it actually impacts the entire world of business. It is truly global. A lot of what we see is both powerful and has the ability to be weaponized. And the key is to know early and to know intelligently. And to do that, we have to combine math and meaning, or man, or woman and machine. Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys. That was really interesting. As I was listening to your spark to a flame to a fire analogy, I was thinking about an example that exploded in the US over the weekend. You had a moment of sort of fairly vile racism that came up at a Trump rally featuring Senator David Perdue. And within about 2 hours, there was a call to boycott Purdue, the chicken company, which, just to be clear, had absolutely nothing to do with Senator Purdue. And watching the social media team from Purdue sort of frantically, sort of and figuratively running around the internet, trying to throw water every time the spark became a flame, was fascinating. And I think they did, in fact, manage to tamp down what was an incipient boycott movement. And again, it's a perfect example of the way in which misinformation and political passions can lead to some, essentially unpredictable outcomes. But it's a great illustration of the kind of issues that we've been talking about here today. And so thank you very much for your time and your insights. Really appreciate it very much.